The November rain falls like needles through the iron gates of the Conti mansion. 2:34 in the morning. The kind of hour when the city belongs only to ghosts and the desperate. Rowan Rivera staggers across white marble steps, her body a catalogue of breaking. 29 years old but looking 47, her dark hair plastered black against skin white as bone. The left side of her temple bleeds through her fingers, drops of scarlet mixing with rain that tastes like copper and ash. Her right knee shows through torn denim, flesh scraped raw underneath, and her thin jacket hangs in tatters that barely cover the ribs visible through her soaked shirt. She clutches something in her fist so tightly her knuckles have turned grey. Inside the foyer, 3 men stand absolutely still. Luca Conti dominates the space like a statue carved from obsidian. 46 years old, 6'2", broad-shouldered in a tailored black suit that costs more than most people's cars. His dark hair is silvered at the temples, and a scar runs from the corner of his left eye down to his cheekbone like a blade someone tried to carve into his face. His eyes are storm grey, cold, untouched by warmth for 23 years. Carlo stands to his left, hand already moving toward the weapon beneath his jacket. Gino mirrors him on the right, both men trained to react in milliseconds to threats. They have served Luca Conti for 15 and 17 years respectively. They have never seen him move the way he moves now. The door swings open. Rain explodes across the threshold. Rowan's body collapses against the doorframe like a marionette with its strings cut, and the scent of expensive cigars mixing with copper blood fills the foyer. The smell hangs there. Heavy. Terrible. For the first time in 23 years, Luca Conti's eyes widen. He recognizes her. The nanny. The one he hired 3 weeks ago to manage his household, to care for his mansion, to exist in the periphery of his empire with quiet efficiency. He watches her every night. He knows her schedule. He knows she takes the same bus route home. He knows she counts money in the dark because she thinks no one is watching. But what he did not expect was to find her bleeding on his threshold at 2:34 in the morning, holding something small and torn in her trembling hand. "Do not move," Luca says. His voice comes out low and solid like an oath, and both Carlo and Gino freeze mid-step. He walks toward her with deliberate slowness. Each movement controlled. Each breath measured. The scar on his face seems to deepen in the dim light as he approaches, and Rowan's body goes rigid, preparing for violence like every other moment of her life has taught her to expect. But he kneels. The crime boss who controls half of Boston, whose name makes men whisper prayers in confession booths, drops to one knee in front of the bleeding woman like a subject before a saint. "What is your name?" he asks. "Rowan," she stammers. Her voice trembles like a candle in the wind, barely a whisper. "Rowan Rivera. I'm sorry. I didn't know where else to go." "The fire, there was a fire." "Show me your hand," he says. She opens her fist with the hesitation of someone expecting punishment. The college acceptance letter tumbles into his palm. The paper is torn at the edges, water-damaged, one corner completely missing, but the name printed across the top remains legible. James Rivera. Class of 2012. Full scholarship. Below the name, a date, November 17, 2012. The date is underlined twice in faded blue pen. Luca stares at it for 3 full seconds. His jaw tightens. A muscle pulses once in his temple, and something ancient and terrible shifts behind his eyes. "Carlo," he says without looking away from the letter. "Get the first aid kit from the bathroom. Gino, call Dr. Volkov. Tell him we need him here in 20 minutes. Tell him it is urgent." "Sir," Carlo says, already moving up the marble staircase. Gino pulls his phone out, fingers flying across the screen. The footsteps above their heads fade into muffled silence. The only sound left is the rain hammering against the tall windows and Rowan's breathing coming in short, panicked gasps. "Are you going to hurt me?" she asks. The question lands between them like a stone dropped into still water. Luca looks at her for a long moment, really looks at her, and when he speaks his voice comes out different. Softer. Like someone has loosened a knot he did not know he was carrying. "No," he says. "I am not going to hurt you." He stands and guides her toward the leather sofa in the sitting room, his hand barely touching her elbow, his movements careful as if she might shatter if he applied too much pressure. She collapses into the cushions and immediately pulls her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them in a protective ball. Luca sits beside her. Not close. Not threatening. Just present. "Your husband," he says, still holding the letter. "James Rivera." "He was," Rowan whispers. "He died. 3 years ago. A work accident. A crane malfunction. He was only 28 years old." The words come out flat, rehearsed, like she has said them so many times they no longer carry the weight of meaning. Like grief has become just another fact to state. "You have children," Luca says. It is not a question. He knows. He has followed her. He has watched her board the northbound bus every evening and get off at the shelter on Bellingham Street. He has watched her stand outside the chain-link fence for exactly 7 minutes before turning away. 7 minutes of watching her children through the fence like she is not allowed to touch them. "Emma," Rowan says. Her voice cracks on the name. "My daughter. She is 7. My son Marcus is 5. They are at the harbour shelter right now. They have been there for 42 days. My landlord evicted us. I could not afford. There is a custody hearing in 3 days, and if I cannot prove I have stable housing and income, Harold Brennan, my husband's former business partner, he is going to take them away from me. He has lawyers. He has money. I have $78 and a dead husband's acceptance letter." The number hangs in the air. $78. The cost of a single dinner in this house. The cost of the cashmere coat draped over the chair behind them. She is holding on to the edge of survival with $78 and 3 days. Carla returns with the first aid kit, a white box with a red cross that costs more than she makes in a week. He sets it on the table in front of them without a word and withdraws to the shadows. Luca opens it and pulls out antiseptic wipes, cotton gauze, bandages wrapped in sterile plastic. "The bleeding on your temple," he says gently. "May I?" Rowan nods and lowers her hand. Luca dabs away the blood with careful precision, examining the wound beneath. Not deep. Bad enough to bleed, but not deep enough to require stitches. He applies antiseptic, and she flinches but does not cry out, and something about that small forbearance seems to affect him. "Your knee," he continues. She extends her right leg. He rolls up the torn pant leg and repeats the process, each movement methodical and slow, and Rowan watches him as if she cannot quite believe what is happening. As if at any moment the gentleness will transform into cruelty and this will reveal itself as the predators dance. But it does not. Carlo and Gino exchange a look neither man has allowed themselves in 15 years. In all the time they have served Luca Conti, they have never seen him touch another human being with anything resembling tenderness. They have seen him order men broken. They have seen him execute judgment with the precision of a surgeon. But they have never seen him kneel. "I followed you tonight," Luca says. "It is a confession. I have followed you every night for 3 weeks. I watched you step between those men and the street vendor. I watched you place yourself in the path of weapons without hesitation. Most people value their own lives more than strangers. You do not. That tells me something about your character. You were following me." Rowan's voice rises in pitch. "Why would you?" "Because," Luca interrupts, and his voice drops lower, "I needed to know if you were someone I could trust. I have not trusted anyone in 23 years. But you, Rowan Rivera, you placed yourself between violence and the helpless. That is not the action of someone who can be bought or corrupted or threatened into betrayal." The doorbell chimes. Dr. Volkov arrives in a rain-soaked overcoat, his medical bag already in hand, and within 40 minutes the wounds are cleaned and bandaged and declared minor. When he leaves, Luca walks him to the door and presses an envelope into his hand that makes the doctor's eyes widen. Then there is silence. Rowan sits on the sofa, her body wrapped in a blanket Gino brought from upstairs, her feet hidden in clean socks, her wounds dressed, her breathing finally steady. But her mind is still racing. "Why are you helping me?" she asks. Luca does not answer immediately. He stands at the window, watching the rain continue its assault on the glass, his reflection ghostly in the darkness behind the pane. Because, he finally says, "I once believed that money sold everything. I believed that power protected what mattered. I believed that if I accumulated enough of both, I could prevent loss from ever touching me again. I was wrong. 23 years ago, I learned how wrong I was. And I have been standing still ever since, waiting for a reason to move again." He turns to face her. "You are that reason," he says. But what Rowan Rivera does not know is that 5 days earlier, she had only $78 and 3 days to save her children, and now those numbers were about to change in ways that would reshape everything. She does not know that Harold Brennan has no idea who she works for, or that Margaret Harrington is already laying plans to destroy her, or that the next 72 hours will determine whether she ever holds her babies again. She does not know that she is about to become the most protected woman in Boston. All she knows is that for the first time since her husband died, someone is kneeling in front of her darkness and refusing to look away. The rain continues. It will not stop for 3 more days. The November rain fell like a curse that would not lift. Rowan Rivera stood outside Sacred Heart Shelter at 6:47 in the evening, holding her daughter Emma's small hand inside a pocket of a coat that did not belong to her. The coat was donated, navy blue, missing a button near the collar, smelling faintly of someone else's perfume. Emma was 7 years old but looked smaller, as if hunger had compressed her bones down to something fragile. Her brother Michael was inside, age 5, sitting with a volunteer in the basement shelter where families with nowhere else to go came to wait out the darkness. Rowan opened her hand. $78. She counted the bills a 4th time, though her fingers already knew the exact texture of each worn edge. This was all the money between her family and the street. $78. In 3 days, she owed $65,000 to Harold Brennan, or he would take custody of both children through a clause David had signed in desperation. A clause her dead husband had never even told her about. "Mommy, my fingers are cold," Emma said. Her voice was small, like a bell wrapped in cotton. Rowan folded the bills away and tucked both their hands deeper into the coat pocket. "I know, baby. Not much longer. We'll go to work soon, and the restaurant is warm." This was the lie she told every night. Work was warm. Mommy had a plan. Everything would be okay. She had been telling these lies for 2 months, ever since the funeral, ever since Harold Brennan appeared at her apartment door with papers that made her blood stop moving through her veins. 2 months earlier, on a day when the sun had still existed, Rowan had buried her husband in a casket cheaper than a used car. The rain had drummed on the wood like 1,000 fingers demanding entry. She remembered the sound. She remembered Harold Brennan's hand on her shoulder, his voice low and practiced, so sorry for her loss, such a tragedy, and then the words that came after. A business loan. $65,000. David's signature on every page. Due in 90 days. "But I don't understand," she had whispered. "What loan?" David never mentioned. He was ashamed, Harold said. His suit was dark gray, expensive, the kind of suit that absorbed light instead of reflecting it. He borrowed to try to save the business. He failed. Now you have 90 days to repay, or the loan transfers to custody of the minor children. That was the collateral. David agreed to it. David was dead. David could not have agreed to anything. But his signature was there, and Harold Brennan's lawyers were waiting, and the math was a cage with no door. 89 days became 60. 60 became 30. Now it was 3. Rowan walked Emma inside the shelter, handed her to a volunteer named Sister Catherine who had kind eyes and calloused hands, then turned back into the November rain. The shelter doors closed behind her like the lid of a coffin being sealed. Her shift at the Conti mansion began in 40 minutes, and she needed to walk through enough of the city to reach it. The mansion occupied 5 stories of Beacon Hill, built in 1887 by a railroad baron, surrounded by a wrought iron fence that cost more than most houses. Rowan had been hired 3 weeks ago through an agency that placed housekeeping staff with wealthy families. She was told to maintain the library, organize the study, occasionally watch the young child when the nanny was away. There was no young child. She had never met Luca Conti face to face. He left notes in careful handwriting, sometimes checks for her payment in envelopes placed on the kitchen counter, instructions written in a precise hand that belonged to someone used to being obeyed. The house staff moved around an absence. His bedroom on the 4th floor was dark. The office door remained closed. Sometimes at night, Rowan heard footsteps above her head in the hallway, but she never saw him. Tonight, while organizing books in the library, her hand touched a small brass key wedged between 2 volumes of Dante. The key was warm, as if someone had held it recently. At the end of the hallway upstairs, on the 3rd floor, there was a door painted white, unmarked, locked. She had noticed it before. Never questioned it. She climbed the stairs and tried the key. The door opened. A nursery. Pale yellow walls with faint paint of clouds and stars that someone had drawn by hand decades ago. A white crib with railings so high a child could never climb out. A mobile of fabric birds suspended from the ceiling, turning slowly in air that should have been still. Books on every shelf. A music box sitting on a low dresser. Everything was organized, everything was clean, everything was untouched since the moment it had been arranged. Rowan's hands began to shake. She locked the door and went downstairs. Carlo was arranging flowers in the main foyer, his back to her, his shoulders wide as a doorway. Carlo had been with Luca Conti for 15 years. Carlo's eyes missed nothing. The 3rd floor, Rowan said quietly. There is a locked door. I opened it by accident. Carlo's hand stopped moving. The flowers in his grip wilted slightly, as if his grip had tightened. When he turned to face her, his expression had become a wall. Do not ask about that room, he said. His voice was not angry. It was worse. It was sad. Do not ever mention it to Mr. Conti. Not ever. Do you understand? Rowan nodded. She finished her shift at 11 o'clock and walked back through November rain toward the restaurant where she worked her second job. The rain was heavier now, the kind of rain that belonged in a funeral service. Her shoes, which had been cheap when she bought them, were now falling apart. Water seeped through a hole in the left sole. Her feet were numb past the point of feeling. 3 blocks from the warehouse district, outside a small shop with Korean characters painted on the window, she heard a voice break open the sound of rain. An old man was pressed against the brick wall. 2 men in dark coats stood in front of him, their bodies large, their intentions clear. One of them held a gun at the vendor's hip, hidden but present, like a promise made quietly. You pay now, one of the men said. His accent was Boston, his tone practiced. Protection money. $500 a week or we burn the shop. The vendor's English was broken, his voice thin as paper. I have no money. I sell only to feed my family. Please, I have no money. One of the men raised his hand. Not to strike. To shoot. Rowan had $78. She had 3 days until she lost her children. She had nothing left to lose because everything had already been taken. She stepped forward into the space between the gun and the old man's chest, her body a shield made of bones and desperation and the last fragments of a woman who had loved her husband and buried him in a coat she had borrowed. He is just trying to feed his family, Rowan said. Her voice shook. Her bare hand shook. Everything about her was transparent, breakable, afraid. Leave him alone. The men looked at her. For a moment, there was only the sound of rain and her heartbeat, which was loud enough to drown out cities. One of the men laughed. It was not a kind sound. He moved his hand. The gun became visible. His finger began to straighten. Then a voice cut through the rain like a blade wrapped in ice. One word. A single word that made the rain itself seem to pause. Enough. The men froze. Shadows moved behind the streetlight. Two figures materialized from the darkness, and the armed men scattered like insects fleeing light. They did not run. They simply vanished, as if they had never existed. Rowan helped the old vendor to his feet. His hands were shaking worse than hers. She opened her pocket and removed a $20 bill. She could not afford to lose it. She gave it to him anyway. "For your family," she said. The old man stared at the bill, then at her face, then looked over her shoulder at the darkness where the voice had come from. He did not say thank you. He simply walked away into the rain, moving as quickly as his old legs could carry him. Rowan turned to look at whoever had spoken. But there was no one there. Only wet pavement and streetlight reflecting off puddles and the sound of an engine starting somewhere in the darkness 3 cars back. In the back seat of a black Mercedes, Luca Conti sat motionless. His hand was pressed against the window. Rain streaked the glass. Behind the streaks, he watched the woman disappear into the November night like a ghost being released from a curse. "Boss," Carlo whispered from the driver's seat. "Who is she?" Luca did not answer. He could not answer. Because somewhere in his chest, behind ribs that had felt nothing for 23 years, something had moved. Something had cracked open like a door being unlocked for the first time since his daughter had died. The rain continued to fall. It would not stop for 3 more days. Luca Conti had not slept. His study was dark except for the glow of the security monitor, where he had been watching the same footage for 3 hours, a woman in rain-soaked clothes standing in the ashes of everything she owned, holding a piece of paper like it was the last thing keeping her alive. He recognized that look. He had seen it once before, 23 years ago, in his daughter's eyes. The rain hammered against the mansion windows. His hands were pressed flat on the mahogany desk, the knuckles white. Something was happening inside his chest, something he had locked away so thoroughly that he had forgotten how to name it. Pain. Concern. The first tremor of love. The study door burst open. Carlo stood in the threshold, rain-wet and urgent. "Boss." Someone breached the perimeter. "East Gate." "She's unconscious on the front steps." Luca was moving before Carlo finished speaking. The marble entryway was cold and vast and merciless. Rowan lay crumpled like a discarded coat, her body outlined in rain that reflected the chandelier light above. Blood traced a line from her temple down her neck, mixing with water and November mud. In her right hand, clenched so tightly her knuckles were purple, was that same torn piece of paper. Luca knelt beside her without hesitation, his 6'3" frame folding with the grace of a man who had learned violence early and mercy late. He lifted her easily, she weighed almost nothing, fragile as a bird with a broken wing. His men stood frozen around him. In 15 years, Carlo had never seen their boss touch another human being with gentleness. Not once. "Call Dr. Chen," Luca said, his voice like stone rolling downhill. "Now." He carried Rowan through hallways lined with oil paintings and crystal sconces, past furniture that cost more than her entire life's earnings. He placed her on the bed in the guest suite, Egyptian cotton sheets, down pillows, a room bigger than any apartment she had ever lived in. Her unconscious body looked impossibly small against the expanse of white bedding. When Dr. Chen arrived 20 minutes later, she found Luca sitting in a chair beside the bed, watching Rowan's breathing like it was the most important thing in the world. The doctor was a woman in her 60s with iron-gray hair and the unshakable demeanor of someone who had treated gunshot wounds and worse. "How long has she been like this?" Dr. Chen asked, unpacking her bag with efficient movements. "Since we brought her in. She was exposed to cold. She hit her head falling." "How bad?" "The examination took 8 minutes. Concussion," Dr. Chen said. "Exhaustion. Severe malnutrition, this woman had not been eating properly for months. Early stages of shock. She needs rest, fluids, food, and safety." "Where has she been living?" Luca's jaw tightened. She has been living nowhere. She lost everything 2 hours ago in a fire. Dr. Chen did not ask more questions. She had worked for Luca Conti long enough to understand that curiosity was a liability. She left medication on the nightstand and instructions written in her precise handwriting. At 4 in the morning, Rowan's eyes opened. The first thing she saw was Luca silhouetted against the window, rain streaking the glass behind him like tears the sky was crying. His shoulders were broad and heavy with something she could not name. He wore the same white shirt from earlier, but now the collar was open and she could see a scar running from his collarbone downward, old, pale, the mark of something violent that had almost killed him once. She jerked upright, and the room tilted. Where am I? What happened? Her hand scrabbled across the sheets, searching for something. Luca moved to the bedside and placed the torn college acceptance letter in her palm. His movements were careful, deliberate, as if she were something that might shatter. You are safe, he said. My home. You collapsed outside. You have been unconscious for 30 minutes. Rowan stared at the letter, then at him, then at the room, at the windows the size of doors, at the art on the walls, at the bathroom she could see through the open door with marble counters and fixtures made of brass. I am sorry, Mr. Conti. I did not mean to. I will leave. I did not know where else. Luca raised one hand. She fell silent. His voice, when he spoke, was lower than she had ever heard it, rougher, like gravel beneath ice. How much do you owe? Rowan blinked. What? How much money do you owe, and to whom, and why? She had held this burden alone for 90 days. She had not told anyone, not the shelter workers, not the other housekeepers at the mansion, not her own children. But something about the way he asked, not with contempt, not with pity, but with the simple directness of a man who wanted to understand, broke something open inside her. The words came out in a whisper. $65,000. My husband signed a business loan with his partner, Harold Brennan, before he died. David thought it would save his company. It buried us instead. Harold wants his money in 2 days or he takes my children through a custody clause in the contract. I have $58 left. I have nothing. I have nobody. Silence folded around them like a living thing. Luca sat on the edge of the bed, his presence overwhelming but his voice almost gentle. Because I have been watching you. I followed you tonight. I saw you give money you cannot afford to lose to a stranger being threatened. I saw you step between guns and a victim when you should have run. I saw you lose everything and still stand up. He paused, his dark eyes, haunted, centuries old, locked on hers. And 23 years ago, someone did that for me, and I was too late to save them in return. I will not be too late again. Rowan shook her head. I do not understand. Why would you help me? I am nobody. I am just your housekeeper. Luca stood, walked to the window. Rain fell in sheets now, torrential, as if the sky itself was weeping. You are the woman who reminded me what I forgot. That some people fight for others even when they have nothing left. That courage is not about power, it is about choosing kindness when the world gives you every reason to be cruel. He turned back to her. Your children will be brought here tomorrow. And the $65,000 you owe, consider it handled. Rowan's voice broke across the word. I cannot pay you back. I have nothing to give you. For the first time in 23 years, something almost human flickered across Luca's face, a crack in the fortress. You already gave me something. You reminded me why I survived. The next morning, Carlo and Gino arrived at the shelter with a car and simple instructions. By noon, Emma and Michael stood in a guest suite 3 times the size of their old apartment, their eyes wide as moons, touching the velvet curtains and the marble fireplace like they were made of something that might disappear. Rowan held them both, her tears falling into their hair. Downstairs, Luca made a phone call. $65,000 moved through wire transfers and accounting channels. By 3 o'clock, Harold Brennan received a message, debt paid in full. Stay away from the Rivera family. What Rowan did not know was that paying the debt was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of something darker. That afternoon, Margaret Harrington arrived at the mansion unannounced. She was 52, elegant in the way of women who had inherited money and learned cruelty as a second language. Her hair was dark and pulled back severely. Her eyes were the color of winter sky, cold, calculating, pitiless. She wore a coat that cost $8,000, and her heels clicked against the marble with a sound like a knife against bone. She found Luca in his study. So the rumors are true. You have taken in a stray. Luca did not look up from his papers. What I do in my home is not your concern, Margaret. She moved around the desk like a predator circling prey. It is my concern when you make yourself vulnerable. People are talking, Luca. They are saying you have gone soft. That you are distracted. That maybe the great Luca Conti has finally found a weakness. She leaned close, her perfume overwhelming, her voice dropping to a whisper. I could destroy that woman with one phone call. One story in the right ear. One post that gets shared across every platform. Is she really worth what comes next? Luca's eyes lifted. They were not angry. They were worse than angry. They were cold as a grave, dark as the bottom of the ocean. Touch her, and you will learn exactly how soft I have become. Margaret smiled, but it was the smile of something that has tasted blood. We will see, Luca. We will see. She left. Luca sat motionless in the darkness of his study, knowing he had just created an enemy. But he did not know yet that Margaret and Marco had been planning this for 6 months, that they had spent half a year positioning themselves, gathering allies, waiting for the moment when his empire would crack. Rowan just gave them the crowbar. That evening, footsteps approached her door. Marco stood in the hallway, his suit perfectly tailored, his smile sharp as broken glass. He was 26 and had never worked a day in his life, had never wanted for anything except power, and now, with his uncle distracted, that power felt within reach. So you went crying to my uncle and he rescued you, Marco said, his voice dripping with something poisonous. How touching. But you still owe me. Rowan stepped backward. I do not owe you anything. Luca paid my debt. Leave me alone. Marco moved closer. His hand shot out and grabbed her wrist, not hard enough to break, but hard enough to prove he could. His fingers were cold. Accidents happen, Rowan. Houses catch fire. Children wander into traffic. Paperwork gets lost at shelters. You want your kids safe? You get me what I asked for. Access codes. Meeting schedules. Documents. Anything that proves my uncle is losing his edge. Rowan jerked free, her voice shaking but fierce. I will tell Luca what you are doing. Marco laughed, and it echoed down the hallway like the sound of a trap closing. And say what? That his nephew asked you to betray him, and instead of reporting it immediately, you waited? That you considered it? He will think you are a threat, Rowan. He will think you brought this darkness into his home. He walked away, his footsteps fading. Rowan stood trembling in the hallway, trapped between two impossible choices, not knowing that Luca's security cameras had recorded every word, that his men had heard every threat, that the machinery of vengeance was already beginning to turn. In the security room 3 floors below, Carlo and Gino exchanged a single look. Boss needs to see this, Carlo said, his voice quiet as a prayer. The November rain fell in sheets, cold and relentless, turning the streets of Boston into rivers of ash and regret. Rowan Rivera stood in the security office 3 floors below the mansion, watching footage on 12 monitors, her hands pressed against the cold glass of the desk. On screen after screen, Marco's face filled the frames, his mouth moving, his hands gesturing, his voice seeping through the speakers like poison. Every word he spoke, every threat he made, every time he grabbed her wrist was captured in crystalline detail. Carlo stood beside her, his jaw clenched, his massive frame radiating controlled fury. The boss needs to see this now, Carlo said, his voice like thunder waiting to break. Rowan shook her head, tears streaming down her face. No. Please. He has already done so much. If he retaliates, it will destroy him. Marco is his nephew. Blood is blood, and Carlo's hand landed gently on her shoulder, surprising her with its tenderness. Miss Rivera, with respect, you do not understand what you are asking. This is not about family anymore. This is about the code. This is about protecting what belongs to Mr. Conti. And you belong to him now. That makes you family too. The clock on the wall read 11:56 p.m. In the study 2 floors above, Luca Conti sat behind a desk of polished mahogany, watching the same footage on his personal monitor. His security chief, a man named Enzo with a scar running from his left eye to his cheekbone, stood silently beside him. Neither man moved. Neither man spoke. They simply watched as Marco's voice filled the quiet. Accidents happen, Rowan. Houses catch fire. Children wander into traffic. The silence that followed was suffocating. Luca's hand moved to a crystal glass filled with amber liquid. He did not drink it. He simply held it, his fingers wrapped around the glass like he was holding something alive that might escape. When he finally spoke, his voice was so low that Enzo had to lean forward to hear it. 40 years, Luca said. Federal prison. Conspiracy, embezzlement, extortion. I want him to live a long life knowing he destroyed himself. Enzo nodded and left the room to make the calls that would set the machinery of justice in motion. At 6:15 a.m. on November 5th, Margaret Harrington's face appeared on every news channel. She wore a navy suit, pearls at her throat, her blonde hair swept into a perfect chignon. The makeup covered the calculation in her eyes. She sat across from a daytime talk show host, her expression arranged into practiced concern. I am simply heartbroken about what I have witnessed, Margaret said, her voice smooth as silk dipped in arsenic. Luca Conti is a dear friend, and I only reached out because I saw a vulnerable man being exploited by someone with nothing. This young woman saw an opportunity, a wealthy, lonely man grieving a tragedy that happened decades ago, and she used that grief as a weapon. The host leaned forward, hungry for the story. Are you suggesting there is a relationship between Mr. Conti and Ms. Rivera? Margaret smiled, sad and knowing. I am suggesting that when a man is broken, he becomes susceptible to manipulation. And when a woman has 2 hungry mouths to feed and no means to provide, desperation makes people capable of extraordinary deception. The footage they showed was edited with surgical precision. Rowan entering the mansion at 11 p.m., her face illuminated by the doorway light. Rowan in the garden with Luca, his hand briefly touching her arm. Rowan walking down a hallway in the early morning, her hair loose around her shoulders. None of it was real. All of it was carefully constructed to appear damning. By 9 a.m., news vans surrounded the mansion gates in Boston. By noon, trending hashtags about Rowan Rivera flooded social media. By 2 p.m., her face was on every evening news broadcast, labeled as a gold digger, a con artist, a woman who seduced her way into a crime boss's fortune. Rowan watched it all from her suite, Emma pressed against her side, Michael asleep in the other room. Her daughter's small voice broke the silence. Mama, why are they saying bad things about you? Rowan had no answer that a 6-year-old could understand. She had no answer that she could give herself. She found Luca in his study, surrounded by phones and screens and men speaking rapidly in Italian. When he saw her, every conversation stopped. The men filed out silently. Rowan stood in the doorway, her borrowed dress hanging loose on her frame, her eyes red and swollen. I am so sorry, she whispered. I never wanted this. I will leave. I will take my children and go. You have already done enough for us. Do not sacrifice yourself for someone like me. Luca's eyes were ice. Sit down, he said, and it was not a request. She Saturday. He moved to the window, his silhouette sharp against the grey November light. Margaret made a tactical error today, he said quietly. She thought she could isolate you and make you afraid enough to leave. She thought you would run, and that my concern for you would distract me from what she and Marco have been building. She was wrong about that. She is wrong about many things. He turned to face her. You are not leaving. You are not running. We are going to show Margaret Harrington and my nephew exactly what happens when you underestimate the people under my protection. At 1 a.m. on November 6, the machinery of federal law enforcement began to move. Margaret Harrington was arrested live on camera during her talk show appearance. 6 FBI agents in dark jackets walked onto the soundstage, their footsteps echoing through the studio like approaching thunder. Margaret's face went white, then red, her carefully constructed smile dissolving. "This is insane," she cried out as they cuffed her hands. "You cannot do this. I have done nothing wrong." The lead agent's voice cut through her protests. "Margaret Eleanor Harrington, you are under arrest for embezzlement, conspiracy to commit murder, and extortion." The cameras captured everything, the moment her mask fell away, the moment her power evaporated, the moment the woman who had orchestrated Rowan's public humiliation became a humiliated criminal herself. The footage was online within minutes. Within an hour, 3 million people had seen it. Within a day, every news outlet in America had replayed the arrest 1,000 times. Marco was taken at 1:41 a.m. from his penthouse apartment. Gino and 8 men moved through his home like shadows. When Marco opened the door, expecting room service, he found death waiting instead, not literal death, but something worse. The death of everything he had built, everything he had believed he deserved. He stumbled backward, his silk robe falling open, his designer apartment suddenly feeling like a prison cell. "Uncle Luca sent me," Marco said, his voice thin. "He wanted me to." Gino's voice was flat and final. "Mr. Conti is not interested in explanations." They took him in handcuffs, his protests echoing down the marble hallway of his apartment building. By dawn, he was being processed into federal custody. The charges: embezzlement from Conti family businesses, conspiracy to commit murder, extortion, attempted coercion. The sentence recommendation: 40 years. Harold Brennan was arrested at 6 a.m. at his office. The FBI raid seized his files, his computers, his fabricated loan documents. The $65,000 he had demanded from Rowan? Forged signatures, illegal interest rates, contracts written to ensure she could never escape the debt. Federal prosecutors had a field day. Harold was led out in handcuffs, news cameras capturing the moment his 3-piece suit and expensive watch could not protect him from consequences. His business collapsed by sunset. His reputation was obliterated by midnight. Rowan watched all 3 arrests from the study's television, Luca standing behind her chair, his hand resting on her shoulder. She felt the weight of it, not heavy, but grounding, real, present. When the final arrest report finished, she turned to face him. "It is over," she said, and the words felt impossible. "It is over." Luca knelt beside her chair, his face level with hers. In 15 years, Carlo and Gino had never seen their boss on his knees before anyone. But here he was, this man who controlled half of Boston, this man who had built an empire from violence and will, kneeling before a woman who had saved him without knowing she was doing it. "You are safe now," he said, his voice barely audible. "Your children are safe. And if you will have me, Rowan Rivera, I want to spend the rest of my life making sure that neither of you ever stands alone in the darkness again." 6 months later, November sunlight poured through windows so clean they seemed like glass doors to another world. Rowan Rivera stood in the renovated nursery, her hand resting on the frame of a small bed, one of 2 now, side by side, where a white crib had been gathering dust for 23 years. Emma slept with her stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm. Michael's blanket had tangled around his legs, but his breathing was steady, peaceful, the sound of a child who no longer woke screaming from nightmares. Sophia's mobile still hung above them, its silver stars refurbished and shining, no longer symbols of loss but of continuation, the past honored, not erased. Rowan heard footsteps on the mahogany stairs. Luca appeared in the doorway, still in his business suit, his tie loosened, the man who controlled half of Boston now pausing to watch 2 children sleep. He had done this every night for 6 months. Coming to this room, standing in the threshold like a prayer finally answered. He closed the door with absolute silence and took her hand without speaking. They moved to the study downstairs, where floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a garden where Carlo sat reading to Emma and Michael on a stone bench, his massive frame hunched over a picture book, doing all the dragon voices. The children's laughter drifted up like music that belonged to a different life. Luca poured 2 glasses of wine, dark red and expensive, the kind she once saw advertised in magazines in waiting rooms. He handed one to her. Their fingers touched. After 6 months, he still touched her like she might disappear. "Do you regret it?" His voice was deep, steady, the voice of a man asking a question that terrified him. "Choosing this life?" Rowan turned the glass slowly in her hands. The wine caught the light like liquid rubies. "I regret nothing," she said. "You gave me back my children, Luca. You gave me back the part of myself that I thought was dead, the part that could still choose hope over surrender." He studied her face like he was memorizing it. "The charges are finalized. Harold Brennan is serving 40 years. Margaret Harrington is in the same facility, 2 cell blocks away. She lost everything, her money, her reputation, her freedom. The footage of her on live television, the way the world saw her for what she was? That was crueler than any bullet could be. She wanted to be invisible through power. Now she is invisible through disgrace." "And Marco?" Rowan asked, though she already knew. "Gone. Federal prison in upstate New York. The organization forgot him within a week. In the underworld, betrayal has only one consequence: erasure. His own family acts as though he never existed." Luca turned away from the window. "I have not dismantled everything. I still have men, still have power, still operate in shadows. But I use it differently now." He pulled a folder from his desk, opened it to reveal photographs of 3 men in handcuffs, their faces covered with bruises. These men trafficked women from Romania and Thailand. Sold them into forced labor. The police had no jurisdiction, the victims were afraid to testify. Last month, my organization found them. We gathered evidence the authorities could use. The men are now facing federal charges they cannot escape. "You became what you were fighting against," Rowan said quietly. "I became what is necessary," Luca corrected. "Predators do not understand law or mercy. They understand only that someone is coming for them in the dark. I am still a blade wrapped in ice, but now the blade cuts in a direction that protects instead of destroys." He showed her more folders. A domestic violence shelter funded through an anonymous donor, him. A scholarship program for children whose parents died in criminal violence, funded and fully staffed. He had turned his intelligence network into a warning system for women in danger, a network that coordinated with actual law enforcement. "The empire does not disappear overnight," he explained. "But it transforms. The money still flows through the same channels, but now it saves people instead of breaking them. My lieutenants think I have lost my mind. But Carlo understands. He told me that power means nothing if you use it only to keep yourself alive." Rowan watched him move through the study, this man who had been a ghost in an expensive suit, animated only by violence and control, now speaking about redemption with the careful precision of someone learning a new language. She thought of the night on the balcony, when both of them had stood on the edge of the darkness, ready to fall. The rain had stopped that night. But it had taken 6 months for the cold to leave their bones. "I want to tell you something," Rowan said. She pulled a folded envelope from her jacket pocket, worn soft from being carried for weeks. Inside was a bank statement. "I opened a business account last month. With the settlement money from the civil suit against Harold Brennan, I registered a non-profit. The House of Hope. It will provide emergency housing for women in financial crisis, women with children, women who have 48 hours before losing everything." Luca took the envelope, read the letterhead. "You named it after yourself." "I named it after every person who has ever stood in the rain with $78 to their name and believed they deserved to disappear." She took the statement back, held it like it was sacred. Harold's embezzlement settlement was $217,000. "I kept enough to stabilize Emma and Michael's lives. The rest goes to the house. Within a year, we will be able to shelter 40 women at any given time. By the end of 3 years, we expand to 3 cities. You are building an empire, Luca said. I am building a life, Rowan corrected. There is a difference. She heard Michael calling from the garden, Mama, Mama, look, and she moved toward the glass doors without hesitation. This woman who had once been invisible, now claimed by children who knew her name with absolute certainty. Luca followed, standing at her shoulder as she watched Michael point at a bird, excitement vibrating through his small body like electricity. When the children were put to bed that evening, when Carlo had left and Gino had confirmed that the perimeter was secure, Luca took Rowan to the nursery one final time. He held her hand as they stood before Sophia's mobile, the silver stars catching the last light of sunset. We decided something together, he said. About what we tell them when they ask who you are, what I do, why we live like we live in the spaces between 2 worlds. And what do we tell them? Rowan whispered. Luca turned to face her, his grey eyes reflecting the starlight. We tell them that their mother is the bravest person we have ever known. That she saved a man who had forgotten how to be human. We tell them that darkness cannot drive out darkness, only love can do that. And we tell them that love is not weakness or mercy or forgiveness given too easily. Love is the most dangerous weapon in the world, because it makes you willing to fight for something beyond yourself. He knelt before her, not the formal gesture of 6 months earlier, but something easier now, something born of habit and trust. I want to ask you something, Rowan Rivera, and I want you to know that I am asking as a man who has learned to be afraid of losing you. From his jacket pocket, he withdrew a ring, not ostentatious, not the kind of thing designed to announce its worth, but beautiful in the way that true things are beautiful. A single diamond set in white gold, simple and unshakable. Marry me, he said. Not because I saved your life or because you saved mine. But because we have chosen, every single day for 6 months, to save each other. Marry me because darkness is coming for us both, and I would rather face it with your hand in mine than rule an empire alone. The ring was cool against her skin as he slipped it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. He had known her size without asking, the way people who truly see each other always do. Rowan pulled him up to his feet and kissed him in the nursery where a child she had never met had taught her that love survives loss, that ghosts can become blessings, that the capacity to love again is not betrayal, it is resurrection. 3 months later, they married in winter silence, just family, just Carlo and Gino and the children and a priest who asked no questions about Luca Conte's business. Rowan wore white and held a bouquet of white roses. Emma scattered petals. Michael held the rings with the seriousness of a man carrying treasure. And at the reception, in the study where they had first confessed their fears, Luca stood and raised a glass. To Rowan, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. Who taught me that the strongest thing a person can do is choose to love after they have been broken? Who stood between guns with nothing but her heart? Who saved a man from himself? And who is now my wife, my partner, my salvation? Carlo and Gino raised their glasses, these hard men in expensive suits, and drank to a woman who had changed everything. And in that moment, in that room filled with quiet triumph, something that had been locked away for 23 years finally opened. Not closure, loss never closes. But continuation. Permission to live. A wound finally beginning to heal. This story teaches us that trauma does not disappear when you find love. It does not vanish like it was never real. But when you stand beside someone who has also been broken, when you choose to build something instead of break something else, when you use your power to protect instead of destroy, that is when darkness finally loses its dominion. Some love stories are about finding someone perfect. This one was about 2 people shattered by loss who chose to stand together in the ruins and build something new. Not because it was easy, but because it was worth it. If this story moved you, drop a like right now and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Tomorrow, we have another story about the courage to love when the world has given you every reason not to. Comment below, what would you do if you lost everything and had to choose between survival and kindness? We will see you in the next one.